magistral de nuestro homenajeado del día de hoy. Es un honor, presentamos al director inglés Boyle. Nuestro director de Relaciones Internacionales, y le puedes agradecer a Daniel, porque fue su constante comunicación con Dani que le hizo estar aquí con nosotros hoy. Gracias, Dani. Entonces tenemos Dani y Dani, esperamos no confundirnos.
Tocayo y tocayo.
Queremos también dar una bienvenida a los más de 22,000 viewers que están en GIFF TV ahorita, que nos están viendo por streaming, que no pudieron estar aquí en este auditorio esta tarde, pues bienvenidos también. Disfruten de esta conferencia magistral. Les recordamos que estaremos en el Teatro Juárez en la noche, a las 9 de la noche. Sí hay espacios para público en general, entonces les esperamos. Yo creo que tenemos unos 450 espacios. Entonces, ahí les esperamos también. Se va a formar en el lado izquierda, atrás de la prensa, para público en general. Si estás viendo el teatro, el lado izquierdo. Les invitamos a acompañarnos. Disfrutan de esta charla, de esta tarde. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for being here. It's an honor. Enjoy.
Thank you. Me siento honrado de estar aquí. Lo siento, no hablo español. Disculpe.
Sí hay traducción simultánea, entonces si no tienen su aparato, lo pueden conseguir aquí afuera.
Okay, bienvenido. It's wonderful to have you with us finally.
Yes.
Many years of anticipation. I wanted to discuss with you some of the heyday of... you grew up in the heyday of British cinema in the 1970s, and it obviously had an impact on you and your work. What was it about this cinema that left its mark on you?
I was very lucky. I was born in 1956, and so when I was like 10, the Beatles were happening, you know. And then when I went to university, when I was like 18, it was punk. And then when I was like in my early 30s, house music, rave music, all these music movements which really influenced me. I've been very lucky to be just about conscious of or appropriately aged to participate in. So those were the most important things. But also cinema was a way, though I never thought I could get into cinema, I used to go and watch. In the 70s I used to go and watch. When I was like 14, 15, I'd go and watch a lot of weird movies in Manchester, which is where I come from in the northwest of England. It's like an industrial city. And there was a small cinema called the Avon Cinema there. And they used to show loads of movies from all over the world. And I remember seeing Jodorowsky's El Topo. I can't remember what year it was released. 72, was it? 60, was it? Well, it probably got to Britain in the early 70s, I think. And I didn't understand it, of course. But I was blown away by this movie and so many others. And I always wanted to get into the cinema because of it. But there was no end in Britain, so I went into the theatre first, which was a lot easier to get into. And it is amazing watching Helly last night in that beautiful theatre and being here. This is like the National Theatre in London, where we work, which is like a huge concrete auditorium for people, you know, it's amazing. So I love the theatre, and I started in the theatre.
And in terms of your cinematic influences, some of these British directors that kind of turned you on, or any type of director from that era, can you share something about them?
Well, Britain, I don't know what your opinion of British cinema is, but there's an idea that we're kind of social realists, and we have some great names that fulfill that. Ken Loach being probably, you know, the genius of all genius, but there's Mike Leigh, Terence Davis. There's so many directors who are like that. But for me, it was never those guys, much though I think some of their work is just genius. It was Nick Roeg who influenced me more than anybody. Because he wasn't a social realist, you know. He used cinema in a much more visceral way that assaulted your senses and your being. You couldn't read it like a book, you know, or a newspaper article. You had to just live with it and experience it. So he was, and it remains for me the greatest unacknowledged British director. Britain tends to worship David Lean, people like that. But for me, it's Nick Roeg. And he made 10 films, I think, between his first one, Performance, through to an amazing film called Eureka. And if I can just ask you to do one thing today, is try and see Eureka, which was his last studio film. And the studio buried it and killed him. And it's one of the greatest performances by Gene Hackman you'll ever see. And it's a wonderful film. And nobody knows it. And so can I recommend that to you and ask you to try and see it in some way. It's a great movie.
There'll be record downloads for Eureka tonight, all over the world. So, in comparison to that cinema that you grew up on loving, can you tell me, what is it about contemporary cinema that you think might be different or perhaps is lacking that you really enjoyed when you were growing up? Is there something that's just not quite there these days, or do you think there's some vacuum?
Well, I'm going to get in trouble here, but I'm not a big Star Wars fan. And I knew I was going to get in trouble. I'm not. I kind of, so my era that Daniel's referring to, like when I was a kid watching movies, was the 70s, but it was adult movies. Like Nick Roeg and Coppola and these great and great French filmmakers, and then Star Wars happened, you know, and it, as we know, it changed the industry, and we're still living through the effects of that now. When you see the summer releases for us all, you know, these huge cartoon or comic book figures, so I miss that. I miss that. Not serious, because I like stuff to be funny, but that kind of adult film that deals with sex and violence in a way that is surprising and difficult and a bit dangerous sometimes, but also doesn't exclude people, doesn't stop you, doesn't feel like it's like exclusive. I like to try and make the films appeal. So I think that's a danger. And I think the other thing that happens, I'll also get in trouble about this, is that Pixar are so good that they've almost obliterated live filmmaking. Because, you know, the Pixar stuff is just genius, you know, but it does lead to a Pixarification of modern cinema. And the big, you know, you can see Despicable 2, you know, which is not Pixar, but it's, you know, borrowed from Pixar, dominates the cinema, you know, and there's nothing wrong with these films, and I love watching them. I'm an addict for animated films, but there is a danger that we lose sight of the kind of adult filmmaking. And you're honouring one of them actually tomorrow or Saturday, Darren Aronofsky, who's continued to try and make that trail of serious, interesting films, you know, that are not based on comic books or superheroes or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Why do you think there aren't more themes with films with adult themes and complex storytelling? Is it because I know there are creators out there who have, you know, that was their intention when they left film school and they had these heady ideas. What happens out there in the real world?
Well, it's because everybody wants to watch Star Wars over and over again, and you know, no, it's like, it's obviously studios and the way the money works and that kind of system, and films have become very squeezed now, and it's becoming worse and worse, almost monthly, that the studios are prepared to back immense budgeted films, but not anything else. So it used to be, just a few years ago, that there were big films and little films. Now the little films the studios are not interested in those either, you know? Except for one season of the year, which is the Academy Award season, when they know that the comic book films won't working that season, so they have a different, and that's the last kind of refuge of those kind of serious adult films, I suppose.
And another refuge these days seems to be television.
And television, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So, on the subject of television, would you ever consider doing some sort of a series?
Yeah, no, I worked first of all in the theatre, and then I worked in television before I became, working in the cinema. And I would be delighted to go back to television. And we're working on a pilot for a television series, and hopefully a series of series for television. Because it is obviously that as the audience has got older, they now, a lot of them watch their work. They want to see this kind of work on television. And television is, in many respects, and certainly in America, more challenging what you see on the cable television than what you can see in the cinema. You know, certainly more easily available is more challenging work, you know.
And how did this turn around? Because when I was a kid, it was like...
Well, sorry, it's weird the way it happens, that, and it seems to have almost happened overnight. Everybody's suddenly fleeing to television, and the cinema is dominated by these huge movies. You know, like Guillermo del Toro's, who's a great filmmaker, and he makes Pacific Rim, because if you're gonna, I admire filmmakers who can work within the studio system and produce what the studio wants them to produce, which is these mega event movies, you know.
And
I think piracy's partly to blame. Mm-hmm. I think the response to piracy a few years ago, which was seen as there was no stopping it, they couldn't stop it, so they tried to think of ways to sidestep it. 3D is that. There's no love of 3D in the studios. They don't love 3D. They do it because it's a way to make the event unique. You know, that you cannot get outside the supermarket off a guy selling you a DVD. You know, so I think there's that. And then the scale of the movies and making it feel like you must go the first weekend to see it is another way of sidestepping piracy. I think they're income protectors, really, in a way.
And speaking of your theater background, do you miss this immediacy of live action and immediate reaction from an audience?
Yeah, I mean, I worked in the theatre until about 16 years ago, and then year before last, we were preparing the Olympic Games opening ceremony in London, which is a kind of theatre event. It's a one-night live spectacle. And so we did a play at the National Theatre in London, Frankenstein, where we double cast these two actors, Benedict Cumberbatch, who's like Sherlock, you may have seen him, anyway, he's quite well known, I think, and Johnny Lee Miller, who played Sick Boy in Trainspotting, and they alternated the part of the creature and the doctor on alternate nights, which is really a lovely thing to do. And it was fascinating rehearsing with them again. But what's weird about theatre is that rehearsal is just the preparation for the actors. As soon as they get in front of an audience like this, they kind of push you away as a director, and you kind of float backwards away from the event. It's really sad, actually. It's like your kid growing up and leaving home, saying bye. It's really, really sad, and and you have to get used to it in the theatre, because they don't want your notes anymore. You know, they just want to get out there and make it, because they are the storyteller. You know, whereas in film, it's the director. I think in theatre, they're the storyteller every night, and every night's unique. It's a wonderful thing. Yeah.
And speaking of receiving feedback from your audience, how often do you actually sit in the audience with one of your films? Not a test group, but an actual commercial audience.
By the time they're released, you can't bear to watch them anymore, so it's difficult because you're so over familiar with them. But I do attend test screenings, which I know a lot of people dislike, but I find very helpful. Not so much what people say afterwards in the focus groups or the way they fill in the cards, but the feel of them as they're watching the film. You can feel where you've made a mistake that's excluded them, where they don't know what's in that envelope and why it's significant, because you've missed a piece of... You can feel the rhythm of the film, and so you learn a lot from that. So I like that part of the process.
So you would do that anyway, even if it wasn't required by the studio for a major release?
Well, it would have to be required, because they cost a lot of money to so the studio pay for them. So I would never pay for one myself. But I did. Shallow Grave, I remember sitting at the back of the audience for that, which is the first time, cinema filmmaker. there's no experience quite like that. To see a bunch of people in front of you paid to see your movie, and it's up there 40 feet high. That's a pretty special feeling, yeah, which you never forget.
And I mentioned your films must test very differently. Like, one thing is to watch it in some controlled environment in LA or in London, but what happens in the rest of the world? How do you know how your films are going to test out there? Don't you get surprised sometimes that, oh, this did particularly well in Thailand? Or...
Yeah, well, there's supposedly, I mean, I love promoting the films abroad, and I try to promote them as much as I can. Supposedly there's a rule in cinema that if your film is a huge hit, like, say, Slumdog was, there's always one territory where it's a flop. You know, that's what they say. There's always one place where it doesn't work. And conversely, if you have a flop, like a disaster, there's always one territory where it's a hit. And so we did this film, after Trainspotting, we did this film, A Life Less Ordinary, which is a big flop, nobody liked. But it was #1 in Belgium for 3 weeks. You know, it was like... So you rely on any kind of like refuge at moments like that when nobody likes your film.
Was there anywhere in the world that Slumdog was a flop?
They never told me that. Americans never tell you any bad news. They always avoid telling you any bad news.
Very good. So, talking about Slumdog, obviously that was a huge film. This gave you some leverage. How long are the studios kind to you after a success like Slumdog?
One film. It's just one film. So we made this. So we did Slumdog, and everybody's like, "Oh, you can have anything you want. You can do anything. You know, it's all there." But really, what they want you to do is Slumdog 2. They say to you, "Oh, you can do anything you want with anybody you want," but really, they want you to make Slumdog 2 with the same actors, even if they died in the first one. Find a way of bringing them back. That's what they really want, you know. So, but we decided to do this film that we'd been trying to make for a few years about this guy, Aaron Ralston, this climber who'd got trapped in a canyon, and eventually to escape, he had to cut his own arm off. He wrote a book about it called Between a Rock and a Hard Place, which is a wonderful first-person narrative of the experience in there. And that was the kind of film that you never get financed normally, except in the shadow of a big hit, you know, following in the wake of a big hit. So that's how we used our card. We played it like that. And you don't get to play another one. You know, you're back in the queue along with everyone else. Yeah, no, you are. It's like, you know, you're just good for one goal, really. You know,
so get out of jail free card. Okay. And in terms of, we've had directors here, some pretty. Who've had a lot of enormous success, and they say that each film is, you know, kind of a battle with the studios. What has your experience been, and what's been the key to your success?
We've been very lucky because the first couple of films we made, Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, did very well. Shallow Grave mostly at home, but Trainspotting then was kind of quite a big hit around the world. It wasn't like a hit on the scale of Slumdog, because it's obviously a very, you know, it's quite a divisive film in a way. So we've been very fortunate, but we've tried, with one exception, which was The Beach, which was a proper studio film. We've always tried to make the films independently in Britain, and so although we get studio money, it tends to be small amounts of it from their indie wings, like Fox Searchlight, who we have a deal with. So I could pretend to have had very bad studio experiences, and I certainly know lots of people who have had, but I've been very fortunate, really, on the whole. There's been lots of ups and downs, but on the whole I've been very fortunate, you know.
Are you in a position now where they give you some tips or notes on something and you can say, I'd rather do it my way?
Well, no, I mean, you know, if anybody, I mean, we make films for under $20 million. If anybody gives you $20 million, they're going to want to say what they'd like you to do with it. And you've got to accept that, you know. So the technique that you try to do is that when they suggest something like a bit of casting, and you go, wow, I never thought of that, that's great. That's really interesting, okay? And then later, the trick is the person that you really want to cast, you make it seem like they've suggested that person as well. So that you feel like you're casting the person they want to cast. That's the technique, if you can do it, if you can get away with it. You know,
I hope they're not watching that. Would you have considered, was the beach a turning point in your career in terms of the scale of the film and the level that you had to deal with the studio?
Yeah, the beach was a $50 million film, which isn't a lot of money in terms of studios, but in terms of us, it was 2-3 times what we'd ever worked with. And it does come with its own sets of problems. It slows everything down, that's the first thing. The sheer amount of money. It's also, I come from a kind of very Catholic background, and so I'm very responsible about money. I don't like wasting money. And I'm very nervous about wasting money. You know, I think it's wrong that huge amounts of money get thrown around. So it suddenly makes you're very self-conscious about what you're doing. And Leo, who's a great friend and an actor and a lovely guy, he was hugely helpful to it. But, you know, the studio wanted it to be Titanic 2. You know, because obviously Titanic was a huge hit, and he'd just come off the back of that. And this whole beach thing with Thailand was interesting, but it'd be much better if it was Titanic 2. So they wanted it to be a love story and things like that. And of course, and I felt very awkward making the film, and it's not my best work. I don't think it is. I mean, I think the film's very enjoyable, but it's not my best work. I'd be quite open about admitting that. And it's certainly my fault, because unlike, say, Guillermo del Toro or Christopher Nolan, who can work clearly very comfortably in big budgets, I'm not the right guy for that, and I've learned that about myself. So after The Beach, we did these much smaller films, a couple of television films actually, with very small cameras, with this emerging digital technology, and that allowed us to make 28 Days Later, which we made with semi-domestic cameras, which became, was a big hit, and spawned a television series in America now, and a World War Z, and all these films are a bit like it. But we don't have any money. We don't get any money from World War Z or The Walking Dead, or whatever it's called, that TV show. If only we'd had shares in that. But actually, George Romero is the guy who should get money from all those people anyway, because he's the guy who pioneered it. We just made them run fast, Actually, we've just been to the Museum of the Mummies. Oh my God, that was amazing, absolutely amazing. I was expecting it to be a kind of cartoony, kind of like fun fair thing. It's absolutely stunning. I've never seen anything like that in my life. It's beautiful, and George Romero would have a great time in there, I think, if he's not already been there.
So, you took from that experience, you decided you learned that you're much better in these like smaller, control-over budgets where you have more control over everything, you can execute easily.
You can also infect it with energy, because what you try and do is you try and become evangelical. And that's to everyone, including the actors, the crew. You try and persuade them of something you're trying to achieve with not enough money. And what you find is that people are looking for a mission, actually, we all are. And it's much more fun to work on a mission than to go through the day-to-day slog of, something that you've done before. So you try and make it, like I said, evangelical in a way. And it produces a kind of force field within the film, which I love, and I believe passionately that makes it look 10 times what it costs. So it makes your film look like $100 million, even though it doesn't cost that. That's my belief about that. I really do believe that, and that's kind of one of the philosophies I work with, and try to share that with the crews, the people, the actors that you work with on the films.
So you've spoken about your Irish Catholic heritage and your parents a bit, but you seem to cast a lot of Scottish actors in your film. Is there and you have a Scottish screenwriter, John Hodge, that you work with.
Yes.
So why the affinity for the Scots?
Well, I think it's more like Celtic, you know, which includes Scotland, Ireland, because I work with a wonderful Irish actor, Cillian Murphy. And when you come from Britain, Sean Connery is someone that you just kind of go, you know, you just bow down to Sean Connery. Because he's the first proper movie star we had, I think, you know. So there's something wonderful about the Scottish language as well. Also, the Scots hate the English, and that's a wonderful tension. You guys must know that, living in the shadow of America. Scotland lives in the shadow of England, that's taking all the credit for everything. And, you know, so it's that kind of, there's a real kind of, you can taste the relationship between the Scottish people and English people. I love that kind of energy. They don't take any bullshit off anybody in Scotland. It's like, you know, so they're a proper good people to work with. And I was very fortunate that on the first film, the producer and the writer, this guy John Hodge, was Scottish, and the book that we adapted second, John wrote the first script as an original script, Shallow Grave, and the book then that we adapted next was this amazing Scottish book, Trainspotting, which is written, if you ever get a chance to read it, it's written in the Scottish vernacular, which is incredibly beautiful to read. Once you have to unlock the code. It sort of unlocks for you after about 15 minutes of reading it. And it's a wonderful read, and I'd recommend the book to anybody. It's a really wonderful book, yeah.
Talking about John Hodge and some of his scripts that he's written for you, one of the underlying themes seems to be this kind of betrayal amongst friends and this infidelity. Is that something that's like bothering him, or is that something that you ask him, hey, this is something that I'm looking for?
It's interesting. So John Hodge was a doctor. When we started with Shallow Grave, he was a practicing doctor. And if you look at the films, there are medical details in the film which are clearly the result of the screenwriter being a doctor. And it's a grand tradition actually, because Chekhov was a doctor. What's his name who wrote Jurassic Park? Crichton. Michael Crichton was a doctor, wasn't he? I think. And I think it's because they get access to us at our most naked, literally and both physically and emotionally, you know. And so they're great story writers. And I don't know whether, so he told us this story about when they work in hospital amongst themselves. And they said they had a code. They would have codes so that they could communicate with each other about you, the patient, without you knowing what they were saying. So they'd say FLK, which meant funny looking kid, like that. And they had lots of them like this, but the worst one they had was TF Bundy. And that stood for you, meaning you were totally fucked, but not dead yet. And he was serious about it. He was absolutely serious. So if you're ever in hospital in Europe or in Britain and you hear somebody mutter TF Bundy, you know you're in a bad way.
So how did you go about meeting these writers? John Hodge, Simon Beaufoy, Alex Garland, they seem to be a recurring part of your arsenal.
Well, we try. I'm not really a writer. I wrote half of 127 hours, and I've been writing something recently, but I know I'm not a writer. So we have this relationship with a few writers. Frank Cottrell Boyce is another one, apart from the ones you mentioned, which are hugely valuable to us, and we try to work like in a partnership with them. So again, we all go on a mission together to try and make an interesting film about something that will surprise people, that isn't what you're expecting. You know, that it's a kind of revelation when you see it. That's always the aim. It's not to kind of like exploit success, because we get very well paid anyway. If you have any kind of success in cinema, you're very well paid. I mean, if you want to have a yacht, okay, you need to make a big movie. But if you don't want to have a yacht, you know, then there's a great line, isn't there, in Wall Street 2 when he says, "How many yachts can you surf behind?" or something. Anyway, it's about yachts and things like that. Anyway, but anyway, so we try and set, and those as writers, they often get big studio work like rewrites and things like that. But when we go to them, it's about a mission. You know, an idea that they may have, we may have, a book that we all like. And we want to work on that together and try and bring, and it takes a couple of years to work on it, but, so we don't have a big slate. We tend to pick a project and then make that, you know, and dedicate ourselves to that, rather than have a cherry tree that you pick the best one off. So it's kind of a faith in what you're doing again.
Are you a fan of game shows?
Like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Yeah, or like any of your early films have, there's a game show on almost every single...
Yeah, there are, aren't there?
Yeah.
In fact, in the first film, this is really weird, and this is a kind of coincidence. In India, they would say that this is fated, but it's very difficult. It's such a coincidence, but it's there in the movie, so you can't deny it. So in the first film, Shallow Grave, if anybody's seen it, there's a scene where Ewan McGregor is sat on the sofa, and his shins have been injured, and he's watching a TV show, and it's called Lose a Million. And it was a failure as a TV show. It only ran once, so you'd never have heard of it. But it was hosted by a guy called Chris Tarrant, who's a kind of, you know, television personality in Britain. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which became such a big hit and which Slumdog Millionaire is sort of based on or uses, was hosted by Chris Tarrant, the same guy, like 15 years later, which is an amazing coincidence, really. And when I first got the script, when Simon Boyle sent me the script of Slumdog Millionaire, my agent said to me, it's about the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And I thought, I don't want to make a film about that. And this is the honest truth, I only read it because Simon Beaufoy was a name I knew had written Full Monty, which is a great film, I thought. And so I read it, and after 10 pages I was like, I knew we were going to make the film together. It was an amazing experience reading it. So. And
game shows for you, do they have some sort of meaning in our society, or are you trying to tell us something?
One of the things we try and make the films about is sort of now, really. It's whatever's dominating popular culture now, you know, so it's more a reflection of that rather than it being a particular bugbear of mine. I mean, I do watch game shows, though I'd never admit it, obviously. But, you know, like everybody else, I do watch them sometimes. Yeah. But I've no particular agenda, no.
So you explained to us how you were in a fortunate position where you got to see the Beatles and the punkers and the electronic music. Electronic music has been in your film since day one, and I always thought it was strange. So I wanted to ask you, are you a real fan of electronic music? Is this something that you listen to in your free time? And are you exposing yourself constantly?
Yeah, big time. I'm getting a bit old for it now, but it's always been my first love, really. And probably painting is probably my second love. I think in Britain we do produce the odd good film and the odd good filmmaker, but we produce much better music than film. We're much better at pop music, and it's our language around the world. It's what connects the whole of the world to us in some way. So I've been part of that. I can't produce music, but I listen to it constantly. I'm devoted to it, really. So that's I guess my first love, and I try and reflect that in the films. And when we started with Shallow Grave and Trainspotting, which we were criticised by a lot of people that the films were too MTV, which was just starting in Europe then. And I didn't see that although it was intended as a criticism, I actually took it as a compliment, because it was clearly what was out there. You know, we were going to know. The soundtrack was going to accompany our lives in a way it hadn't quite as much previously. And now, of course, we all have playlists, you know, and so it was something that I felt very proud to try and develop in storytelling and in character and situations. And sometimes it would not be subtle. It would not be invisible. I want the songs or the music to feel like a character, to be present, and it reminds you of different things, because everybody has a different relationship with the song. Sometimes you feel, you think, wow, I haven't heard that for years, or sometimes it's used inappropriately to a scene deliberately, So I like that dynamic that music, that extra dynamic that music allows you to create.
And do you find that electronic music goes with your style of filmmaking more? You have a very kinetic camera that tends to move a lot. Do you feel that worked better with electronic music than, say, rock or any other type of...
Yeah, I think it's probably just personal taste, but yeah, that may come down to that. I love films to declare themselves early on, you know, to be... David Lean says that, actually. He says you should declare your film in the first 5 minutes. You should make people know what they're going to watch in the first 5 minutes. You know, the intention of the film, the energy, or the electricity of the film has to be there in the first 5 minutes. And I certainly, that's something I try to follow. And it's often why we have sequences at the beginning that are, you know, startling. And I love chucking people into a film so that, you know, you've got two options really. You go with it or you walk out. You know, it's kind of, it's not, they're not, I don't want them to be reflective experiences as you watch them. That can be for afterwards. But I want them to be immersive experiences when you're sitting there at that moment. Because I find that moment of all these strangers sitting together, watching a big screen with actors on it, I find that kind of mythic and kind of timeless. I know it isn't timeless, obviously, because it's just 100 years, but there's something about it that connects us with the deep need for storytelling, which we lose ourselves in. And it's just the most modern way of telling that, that's all. But it feels mythic to me.
And can you tell us a little bit about Trainspotting 2 and where you are with that?
Yes, so having said that Despicable 2 is a great shame that's dominating the cinema, we ourselves are going to do a sequel, yes, no, but we've got a plan to try and do a sequel to Trainspotting, but it would be a very, very different film, because what it would be about is it would be about the same actors playing the same characters 20 years later. So it would be for 2016, which is when the film will be 20 years old. And it is, we considered making it 10 years ago when it was, you know, in 2006, but the actors didn't look any different really to how they looked in the... They did a little bit, but they look after themselves, actors, you know, they're quite careful about...
You're pickled.
Yeah, well, no, I think they're in a spa with cream on them every weekend, and they like to give you the impression they're hard drinkers, and, you know, they're shoving back their tequila every weekend, but I think they're in the health spa, actually. Anyway, they didn't look very different, but now... I met them all recently, and now they do look different, you know. And that's not you know, we all do, of course. It's part of the human, you know, it's part of our chain. But I think that will be the energy that the film is about time. And what you make of it, what you've done with it, you know, your regrets, and what can lie before you when so much lies behind you. It'll be that kind of, which will be a surprise, I hope, for people. It certainly will be a surprise for everybody turning up and expecting to see them running down the street again. They're too old for that now, you know.
And finally, when are you going to film in Latin America? When are you going to finally film in Latin America?
Well, this is seriously, this is my first. Yeah, that would be very nice, wouldn't it? Well, we've already got one location, which is the Museum of the Mummies. Seriously, we went to the Diego Rivera Museum this morning as well, which was amazing because there's these paintings there. I'd never seen his paintings of the Mayan creation myth, which were just incredible. Anyway, so, but this is my shame, this is my first time in Mexico, and and Daniel has been extraordinary the way he's invited me, really since Trainspotting. He's been writing, and each year I love to come, but you know, you're filming or something and you can't come. So this year I'm very proud to be here, and I would love to come back, certainly. And seeing Heli last night was wonderful. I mean, that was a seriously honourable experience to be able to watch that film where it was made, and in the presence of the filmmaker and the crew, and the cast lined up at the end on stage. That was very moving, actually, so that was a wonderful experience for me. So thank you all for that.
Pues vamos a abrir las preguntas a la audiencia. Por aquí tenemos 2 micrófonos y 2 voluntarios Y si les puedo encargar un radio de traducción para Dani, si nos prestan uno, por las preguntas inevitables, larguísimos, que yo no puedo traducir. So, aquí tenemos uno aquí enfrente. No, ni más.
Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel, for coming to Mexico. We're very proud to have you here. And I've been raised up in England for a period of time in my life, and I go there often. So I just want to tell you that I love you very much, that I have loved your films, that I have got the CDs, and I live with you in my soul. So I want to see you in London, and I will give you my address, so we can keep in touch, because I am just thank you so much, I love you from my heart. Thank you.
Well, after that, what can we say, man? Come on.
Muchacho.
Well, hello, I'm Silvestre Lopez Portillo. One question, here are so many students and young filmmakers. There's one subject that I'm really good, if you can tell me, is the digital camera. When your DP saw Dogma, the movement Dogma, and saw Celebration, that film, then you choose to make the films on digital camera on Slumdog Millionaire and won an Oscar, for example. And you are the one of the directors that prefers to shoot on digital. And now it's almost a challenge between some directors like Christopher Nolan, for example, that prefers the 35, and some others that prefer the digital. It's a great subject, for example, for a film festival.
Thank you. It's a very good question. What's actually happening, I think, is that I don't think even Chris Nolan will be able to shoot on film anymore, because the labs are all closing. It's just simple. They're just closing, and everybody's shooting on the Alexa now, this camera, the Alexa, which is just like a film camera, except you can run it for an hour, and then what you do with it afterwards, in terms of backup and download and stuff like that, is just the same, sort of similar laborious processes with developing film and printing. So I think it's over, actually, the question. I doubt that we will, very many people will ever be able to work on film again, which is extraordinary. And again, we've been talking about it since, since 28 Days Later. I've been aware of that dialogue and conversation of which way should it go. And it seemed like nothing would happen for 10 years, and then suddenly, like that, the lights went out on film. And I think it's commercial, the labs or the camera hire houses just develop a camera which works, the Alexa or the Red, and suddenly they all decide to go with that, and that's it for film, I think. For me personally, I love discovering digital work, because I found the process of film too classical for me. I tended to think what would often happen is you'd be battling the proper behaviour with a camera, which is a big crew, which is a certain way of working, very established tradition, very normal tradition. But I like to contradict that. And introducing the digital cameras, as we did on 28 Days Later, nobody knew anything about them. Anybody in the public knew as much as anybody about them, because you just read it in the little book brochure you bought the camera with. And I loved that freedom of saying, no, we don't have to do it that way, we can do it like this. We can get 8 of them and just put them there, and there, and just turn them on. And I love that freedom, You still got to tell a story, and how you tell it is what it's all about, but I loved that freedom it gave. And the other thing I loved is operating. Because Anthony Dogmantle, the cameraman, the cinematographer you mentioned, this is one of the bones of contention between us we always argue about. Anthony wants to be a cinematographer to light. I'm not that bothered about the lighting, to be honest. It's the operating I want. I want them to be able to move with the camera, so that it reacts to an actor always, as flexibly as you and I can react. rather than it have to be through a piece of machinery, which often film cameras and Alexas are so heavy that they often have to be through a piece of machinery like a Steadicam or a crane or whatever. But I want them to have the freedom that we have as humans, that you react like that. So that's my personal taste for digital. And I don't feel like we've won, because it's not like that really. It's very sad, but also an opportunity for a new generation to make something of with the new technology, which they are so familiar with anyway, you know.
Well, here. Well, I am here. Well, like all we know, this career is so critical. And for example, my mom always told me that I will going to die of hunger if I study this. So, just like her, there are many people that always say something like that. And there was a time in your life that you say, I can't do this, maybe I should let this and live my dream.
Sorry, just tell me again exactly what your mother said to you. I missed that bit.
In your career, sometimes you say in the past, I can do this, maybe I should let this and live my dream. But my mom told me that I will going to die of hunger if I do this.
Parents. I can say that because I'm a parent and I say the same thing to my kids now. Never trust a parent, it's just bullshit, you know. They're just jealous because they missed their opportunity, you know, all that kind of stuff. No, it's seriously. I mean, what was amazing for me, I'm a twin. I have a twin sister. And a younger sister as well. And when we were growing up, our parents, who were poor parents of an Irish Catholic background, wanted us to get proper jobs because it was the way out, you know, for a poorer family. It was the way out. You somehow got your kids educated and they did better than you, and they put us under pressure to get proper jobs. And my sister did the properest job of all, and for me it is, and she's a teacher, you know, which is a wonderful thing, you know, where she comes from. She became a teacher, but because I was a boy, there wasn't the same pressure on me and I was allowed to indulge myself. But I remember them saying, you'd be better to try and be a bank manager, you know. But then look what you would become if you'd been a bank manager. Look what's happened to banks in the last 5 years. They're like war criminals, you know, the way they've behaved in the world, you know, banks. So it's amazing the way that the parents' advice is irrelevant in a way. You have to, it is a cliche, but you have to try and follow your dreams. And the only thing that happens, I think, is that the people whose dream it isn't really, the people who are doing it because it's glamorous, or they want to get laid, or all those kind of reasons that, you know, they get bored eventually because it's difficult. And the lunatics, which sound like you are one, and I'm one, just stick at it and kind of starve. But you'll get there. Because, you know, eventually you will get there. Because you're lunatic enough, it'll happen. And it never feels like it will until it does, and then you think, how did that happen? But you're suddenly involved, you know, and making films or whatever it is you want to do, you know. You've just got to follow that, really. And employment opportunities are just ridiculous anyway. They're completely undependable. You know, in the old days, it was a bank manager was the great reliable job, you know. Now it's like, all jobs are unreliable. Nobody knows what's going to happen in economies, you know. So there's even more reason to follow your dreams.
So I have to go my dream till the end and do what I want. And well, thank you very much. I am very lucky for speak with you and with something like
cool. The other thing, and this is worth remembering, and you often forget it. Cinema is vampiric on young blood. It is, not just for the audience, but for the ideas. If there's one thing cinema needs, it needs new ideas constantly, and it needs young energy and talent. And when you get to my age, you tend to defend, like everybody does, you defend your little position because you want it to last for as long as possible. And that's why the industry looks like it's impossible to get into to young people. But always remember that actually you've got the biggest advantage of all, which you've got a young mind, you know, and you're going to see things differently and think they should be done differently. And you should be really proud of that. You know, that's part of the wonder of the time you're at the moment as students. As you said, so many students here, so good luck to you. It's a great position to be in, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, Lenny. My question is, are you aware that I'm here? Are you aware that you start some kind of I don't know, some kind of revolution in the zombie culture, the zombie cinema? Because with 28 Days Later, you start this big thing, and just by one move, making them run faster. I think that was one of the most genius things that I've ever saw, me as a zombie fan. So I was wondering, where did that idea of a zombie film born in you?
So the guy who wrote 28 Days Later is called Alex Garland. He's a big zombie fan. He knows everything. He's seen every zombie movie. You know, he's a huge aficionado of George Romero. You know. So when we sat down to do it together, I said I don't really like zombie films, which I didn't, and I hadn't really seen very many of them. I mean, Hold My Hand Up, George Romero, obviously a couple of those films are great films, but I wasn't really a big fan of them. And he said to me, why? And I said, because I think they're stupid. Because I think if you were in problems, you'd just break into a gentle jog and you'd be able to run away from them. What's the problem? It's like, in fact, you just need to walk quickly and you're free, you know? So I said, where's the tension in that? And years ago, I used to go out with a ballet dancer. And I don't know whether any of you have been out with ballet dancers, but it is a different experience because they're focused on their body in a way that most of us aren't. You know, their body is an absolute temple and engine, and it's everything. And I remembered how she moved. And also, suddenly, you'd feel her strength, and it was like, whoa! It was like really strong. And so, we looked up, I thought, what would be interesting if we got a lot of ballet dancers who were retired to play the zombies, and then I thought, oh, they're a bit gay, ballet dancers, so they might not look, you know, threatening enough. And then, I apologise there straight away for that remark, and then, seriously, we then thought about athletes. People who were professional athletes who trained for 15 years to kind of develop their body in that way. And weirdly enough, in Britain, in London, there's an agency where when you've been an international athlete and you've hit 30 and you have to retire because you're no good anymore, you know, you can't win the competitions, they go to this agency and they get employment going around festivals performing somersaults, and they will get flown out to Dubai to turn some somersaults and cut a ribbon in front of a supermarket to open a supermarket, things like this. So we did this workshop. I get this workshop with them. We got about 30 of them in, and it was one of the most frightening things I've ever done. Where I did this workshop based on me as a victim and them attacking me, but attacking me in a way that they wouldn't hurt me. They would attack me, but they, you know, as you have to do, make sure that what looks violent actually isn't. And it was scary, and that's what it came out of. We thought we'll do it that way. And basically the people we employed were old athletes who could run really fast, but their physical manifestation was really frightening. They could really, really hurt you. If they lost their mind, they'd break your arm like that, you know, because of the power in their bodies. So that's where that came from, really. So it's not genius, it's just kind of anti-stupid, really.
That's the point.
over here. You directed the beginning, the great entrance of the Olympic Games. And being a British person, you must be a great fan of Britpop, which is awesome. We can see in most of your movies great influence of Britpop. But here's my question: what was the biggest challenge for you when you had to do that coordination of people and music and lights and oh my God, the stadium was amazing and all that movement? What was the biggest challenge out of everything?
The most important challenge was preserving the spirit of the volunteers, because we did it. There was like 8,000 people performing in it, and they'd all volunteered on rainy nights in the winter, and they'd all come to rehearsals. They were like doctors, nurses, unemployed students. I had all sorts of people, but who loved the idea of being in it. And that spirit is very easy to damage, because they come up against the IOC, which is a huge corporation like Coca-Cola. It's a brand, it has all these rules. You're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to wear that t-shirt, you know, all this kind of stuff. And you had to, the most important challenge was preserving the spirit of those volunteers, so that they felt they were on a mission. Like I was saying earlier about the way we did things, we wanted to do something different with the show, because we'd had Beijing, it was huge, you couldn't copy it, because, you know, it cost 500 million, I don't know what it cost, it was just like beyond scale, and, you know, just dazzling. And we said, we'll do something different and try and make ours feel more personal, so that people connect with your spirit of the stories you're telling and the people you're performing, you're presenting. So that was the most important thing. And it was hard, because they have all these rules and regulations which are designed to wear out these people. Like, for instance, they insist that they don't want to tell people what they're doing. And I said, what do you mean? I said, well, and if you watch the opening ceremonies, the performers, when you get a close-up like that, like I'm in a close-up like that, you'll see them and they're doing this, but they've got a look on their face like, why are we doing this? I've no idea, we've just been told to do this, because it makes a pretty picture. So we said, no, we're going to tell everybody. So we gathered everybody together like this, in big groups, and we told them the whole stories they were going to tell. And we asked them not to leak it to the newspapers, which is what the IOC were obsessed and worried about, which is why they didn't want to share it. But we shared it and then said, but keep it as a surprise for people, which they did, because you kind of put your faith in them. I'm a big believer in that. You have to believe in people, that they will deliver for you, and then they'll deliver beyond your expectations. They suddenly become a giant, you know? And we got 8,000 giants working for us, which is way better than what Beijing could give you, you know? Because these people were now giants, and so that was the most important thing about it, I think. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Muchacho.
Hi, Danny. Sorry, I can't stand this. I have my knee fixed. But, well,
me too. Me too.
My question is, I know you have a very good influence with the pop culture, but now what is happening is it's almost fading out in Britain. Well, at least in London. So my question is, would you ever do a musical? I know it's not, you know, your thing, but I'm not like a musical fan, but I know you could do like a really good musical in some way.
Listen, I think that the holy grail for any film director is an original musical. You know, which uses original music and an original story, so not a version of a stage show that already exists, but a new story with new songs, where people just sing. Because I can't think of anything that's more wonderful to see in a cinema than that, when it works. You know, when people sing and you accept it, it's just wonderful. It's just like I'm talking, except with extra poetry, with extra... So, we made this little film, well, I call it a little film, it's a wonderful little film called Millions, which was about this little boy. He was 8 years old and he's sort of saint, you know, he's sort of like... It was based on me and the writer, thank God for all boys, our background. We were both brought up very strict Catholics. And it was about his imagination. And we discussed doing it as a musical, and we didn't have enough confidence then to do it, and we should have done. I really regret that, because that was a musical. Because he was 8, he could sing, and everybody would have just accepted it. You know, you would have just gone with it, and that would have made everybody else be able to sing. But we didn't, so we missed the chance there, which I really regret. But we keep searching, yeah. We're still searching, so the search goes on for the Grail, yeah, the Holy Grail.
Thank you. Another just small. It's like I'm an actor too, so the thing is, I know you're good with actors. You know, like you cast some people like this. I don't know, the actress from Slumdog, and she wasn't, you know, known as an actress. But do you trust, you know, sometimes in people like to give them a shot?
Yeah. I love. We've been very fortunate to discover or kind of unearth some talent, you know, and there is something wonderful in cinema. When you watch that film last night, Heli, Amat's film, you know, to see that talent uncovered of people who've never done it before, and he puts the film in their hands. You know, it's not like he's cutting away, quick cutting, or, you know, shielding them, you know, shaping their performance by shielding them. He's trusting them to tell the story for him, or with his help. And it's a wonderful thing in cinema, I think. So I've been very fortunate like that. And I mean, the reality of cinema, certainly in commercial terms, is you have to cast well-known actors. And the truth is they're usually well-known for a reason, because they're very good actors at what they do. But to mix it up with the unknown is also wonderful as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hey. I'm over here. Here! On your right. Okay. Hey! Yeah. Hey, I am 16. I am currently into film studying. And I want an advice from you for all of the students in film school, and for me, from you.
Nothing more specific than that.
Well, I think a lot of the students of film schools are in here. I think like half of them.
Yeah.
And Mexico has like a short line from the career of filming. Like this young man said, my parents don't support me. Well, my parents do, but lots of people don't get support from the government or from their parents or anything like that. So I think that you have a great advice as a great filmmaker, and I think you should give it to us. Well, I'm asking for it. You don't have to, you know.
I just wondered, do you mean haircuts or advice on your haircut or anything like that? Seriously. What I said before is true. I think and I remember being your age, and I remember writing to film directors, actually, and film producers, and trying to get work, you know, and they never replied, you know, you never heard anything back. So I remember that feeling of thinking, how do you ever get started, you know, how do you ever get a real trajectory going? And I can only say, looking back on it now, that it does happen if you are lunatic enough, you know, if your passion for it is something, you have to do it, you know. And sure, you've got to make some money sometimes, so you've got to do other things maybe, or work in a bar at night, or whatever it is. But that passion is there. The only advice I'll give you, seriously, apart from that's trying to tell you something that you can't perceive at the moment, but you'll understand in retrospect, about the power of youth and the young mind and how important it is to cinema. But the only other practical advice I give you is to work in a peer group. Because often when you are, like in your 20s, you want to kind of, you go up and ask a director, can you go and work with a director, you know, who's in his 40s or 50s like me? And if you got a job like that, you'd think, great. But actually, the real thing you should do is work with your peer group. You know, the people with you, who you share an idea with. I don't mean you necessarily agree about things, because it's often good that you don't, but that you can actually work together. Because those are the relationships that will help you through your work. And that's crew, art director, costume designer, it's like a producer, it's like a cinematographer, it's like a writer or actor. It's try and work in your peer group, you know, and be proud of that, and you'll be amazed. That's where the nourishment comes from, not by kneeling at the feet of people that you imagine are great masters or anything like that, you know. It's that independence of going, no, we'll do it ourselves, is the best advice, I think, that you can get. So, yeah.
Look, I totally love your films, and that's in behalf of everyone.
Gracias. Gracias.
Got it. Over here again. I was told you, I know that you've been talking about Ellie again and again and again, that you saw last night the film, but I have here the actor, that if you don't mind to go up there, here's the actor of Ellie. She wants to make things to you.
Hi, I don't know what to say exactly. I feel like honored.
He feels honored because he says that he can believe that someone that he's been following through his career will think so much of his acting in the movie that you saw last night, and just the fact that you saw it, he's just. And he thinks that the most important thing is that he loves the fact that the spirit of the people is the main thing that you support in a film to get to where you are.
It was really interesting watching the film, because obviously what he did, Amanda, is he wanted to see these extraordinary events, and obviously, you know, in the West we read about stuff like that in these grotesque, ghoulish headlines, you know, about bodies hanging under, you know, and stuff like that. But what he did, what I found wonderful about the film, was that he saw it through ordinary people's eyes, you know, ordinary people, and that was why he wanted clearly to cast an unknown cast, if you like, you know, and to entrust you with the film. And I thought that was very, very moving about the film. And I didn't find the film ghoulish at all. It's very strong at moments, but it actually felt very mature in the way he depicted those events, you know. And there was a wonderful, I don't know if you've seen it, there's an amazing moment where he first takes her, where that other guy first takes the young girl, and he says, I want to show you something. And then there's a dog there barking. And he says, oh fuck, I forgot about the dog. Didn't think there'd be a dog here. And they go away. And it's like that moment in, in Fargo. The Coen brothers. I don't know whether you remember, they go to that car park once and drive around it. You think, what was all that about? You know, nothing happens. And then he come back, and it's extraordinary. And it's that thing the postman always rings twice. And when he comes back to that place, he brings the gun to kill the dog, and he brings the equipment to burst it open, and it's just, you know, I thought, and then the use of the other dog in it as well. I just thought there were some wonderful things in it, really. I know I'm talking about the dogs, not the actors, but I apologise about that. So the dogs are very good too.
I'd like to ask about regret. I'd like to know what specific decision, as managing budgets, as developing technologies, as casting actors. I don't want a life lesson about regret not being good as, you know, as a cinematographer or as a human being in general. I want to know what you regret about your career.
This could be really personal. I regret, as I said, genuinely regret the opportunity to make a musical, which stood in front of us and we didn't realise, and that's a genuine, very deep regret, which I think we will rectify. I'm very fortunate. My other regret, which was I don't know whether you want to listen to this, but anyway. So we made this film, The Beach, right, which is set in Thailand. And we made the film in the old way, which is that we took 250 crew from Britain. And they arrived in Thailand, all paid per diems, lots of money. And you arrive in this incredible paradise with a population who are prepared to do anything for you if you'll pay the money. And it was wrong. I didn't realise it at the time, but it was wrong. And you can't make, I don't believe you can make a decent film like that anymore. That's a colonial way of making a film, which is you arrive literally with an army. And you say, yeah, this is good, we'll do it here. You know, and you say, and then you hire the local labourers to service you, to make you drinks, to kind of, you know, you have a great time. But actually, the heart of your film has been eaten away, I think. And that's the way they used to make movies, and I don't think you can make them now like that in the modern way. And this isn't a regret, because actually, what we learned from that is that when we did this film, Slumdog Millionaire, we took 8 people to India only. And that was deliberate, because we thought if we're going to make this even half decent, we've got to make it within India, not arrive with a colonial army from Britain, because we have a very curious relationship with India anyway, which we ruled until 1947. But you cannot behave like that. You've got to go and trust local people to be your heads of department and to help you see India and see something truthful and make the film like that. So that was a regret that I had, that I learned and we used to make a much better film, Slumdog Millionaire. So that was, I suppose the only other regrets are personal ones, which I'll share with you later if you... They're usually about girls and love and all that kind of stuff. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm in the middle, in the center.
Yes.
Okay, hello, thanks for the conference. I found it to be really interesting. I want to know what are in your experience, what have been the biggest disadvantages of being a filmmaker? The sacrifices you have to make, how do you preserve a relationship or your family even? So what is like the not glamorous part of it and the part that you will never get back, for example? Thank you.
Yeah. You miss your kids growing up a bit. I've got 3 kids who are now all in their 20s, and you miss them growing up a bit. It's the biggest single. And I remember actually, when we were doing The Beach was cursed from the beginning. We had these terrible accidents. Nobody lost their lives, but it was a very close thing. And I remember we were on this boat and we got caught in this storm, and we were filming, and the boat got turned over, and there was all this camera equipment and boxes, like makeup boxes flying around, which normally mean nothing to you, but when they're on the top of a wave, coming down on top of you, it'll kill you if it hits you, you know? And I remember thinking about my kids at that moment, that weird one. I remember thinking, this is it, isn't it? And I think it's so unfair, I haven't seen my kids for so long, you know? So those are the kind of things, really. The rest of it is pretty amazing if you're lunatic enough to want it the whole time, which I guess I am. You know, I kind of live like that, really. Yeah, it's hard on relationships, I think. The woman I had, the mother of our kids, is also a casting director, and we've worked together for a long, long time, and although we've split up now, we still work together, so we managed to maintain professional familiarity and friendship, as well as respect for each other. So we've come out of it in the end all right. But yeah, it's tough, but if you're lunatic enough, you'll put up with all that, you know. So.
Hi, Danny. Over here. Thank you so much for the talk. I'm a big fan of your work, but actually I'm a big fan of you after this. So there's a lot of guys who study cinema here, and press, and everyone who I think would like to know, you're a very passionate man, like very, very passionate, and that it's actually very contagious. I would like to know what makes you tick, what makes Danny Boyle tick, what makes you so passionate, what inspires you, because all your movies are so different. And I don't know all of your paintings, but I believe that they're very different too. So what makes you tick and makes you so passionate? What makes you vibe like that as Danny Boyle?
I think it's that you when you get hold of you want to tell a story that's slightly different somehow, and you're convinced of it in your own head, and you want to try and convince you of it. You know, that's what you want to do. For some reason, which is delusional sometimes, because it turns out that they weren't interested anyway. You know, so you don't always get it right, but you have a conviction about a story. And I've been very fortunate. I've never done a story that I didn't feel, I really want to tell that story, which I think happens in the business, sequels, things like that. People do them for the wrong reason, and I've been very lucky not to have that. So it's wanting to convey a story to people in a manner that's exciting and exhilarating, and you know, I believe in the 2 hours or the 90 minutes that you spend in the cinema as an experience, you know. And I want to add to that experience for people if I can. I don't know how it's going to change now if cinema as an exhibition space dies out, but certainly up until now I really believe in it as an artistic experience for people, yeah. So that's it really, I guess. So I can't answer it any better than that.
Thank you very much.
Danny, sorry, I've just been waiting for half an hour for the microphone. About 28 days later, I've read that you've been inspired by Godspeed You Black Emperor for the soundtrack. And well, this led to John Murphy creating one of the greatest soundtracks that has been made over the last decade, which had been used a lot over the span of cinema and even TV commercials. You can see one in Samsung, I think. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And, being such a music-inspired person, have you ever considered making music videos?
No, I've done one, which is that when we did Trainspotting, the song at the beginning of it is Iggy Pop, Lust for Life. And so what we did is that the music company wanted to re-release the record when the film was a hit. And so they said, would you make a video of it, you know, for MTV? And so we said, yeah, and we came up with this idea. Iggy, I don't know whether you've ever seen him in concert, but he's got the most amazing body. I mean, it's just like, I mean, he's in his 60s now and he still looks unbelievable, you know, it's like, but he also used to wear see-through trousers. Have you ever seen him in the see-through trousers? They'd be completely see-through trousers that he would wear, naked from here on. I mean, it's just, so we had this idea that we got 40 people aged from, I think the youngest was 5 years old, to a guy in his late 70s. And we did like 40 people all wearing trousers like that, from age 5 to age late 70s. And Iggy in front of them with the trousers on as well. And they all danced to Lust for Life for the 3 minutes of the video, and that was the video. It was great, I thought. But I don't think Iggy liked it very much. I think he thought we were taking the piss out of him. We weren't, because I love his stuff. I mean, it's like amazing. But anyway, so that's the only one I've directed, yeah. But
about the Godspeed You thing, well, the music, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I love, I mean, when you discover a band, like I discovered Godspeed You Black Emperor, it is wonderful. I can recommend, if you've never heard their stuff, you should listen to their stuff. It's extraordinary music. They're a kind of French-Canadian, kind of sort of semi-anarchist group who believe in working as a collective, and they try to work outside conventional record companies. And we had to ask them special permission to use in the film. Because it was a commercially released film, they weren't very keen, because they normally only license their work to documentaries, you know, to serious documentaries. But we showed them the film and they liked it, so they gave us permission. And it certainly inspired John Murphy to write that great track, which you mentioned is used. And it's interesting, because here's another connection with the other filmmaker that you're honouring this year. So Darren Aronofsky's composer. Yeah, he has that track that's used in everything. You hear it on all the sports channels, and it's been used as on the trailers for Lord of the Rings, and it comes out of one of their films together. I can't remember which one it comes out of, but apart from that Murphy track, it's probably the most used track that you ever hear and constantly regurgitated, you know.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right here. First of all, thank you because you talked to us. It's been like such a it opened our eyes in so many themes. And my question goes directly to you are such an experimental director, which is many of the reasons why we love you as a filmmaker. And well, you made 20 Days Later, which is like a horror movie, and then you make Sunshine, which is like a sci-fi movie. And those are like the two genres that in cinema are like something like less valued. Like, oh yeah, that's a horror movie, or oh yeah, another sci-fi. How was it for you to make that jump from like The Beach, which is like an action movie and what sort of a drama? How was it for you personally, like jump to horror or jump to sci-fi?
I like that feeling of changing because it puts you in a position where this sounds crazy, but it's true, where you sort of don't know what you're doing. You don't know, when you start making the film, you don't know how to make the film. And I like that, you know, so you have to research the other movies that are in that genre, or you have to kind of think about how it's been previously presented and do you want to contradict that, and how are you going to occupy the genre? Are you going to be, you know, how original are you going to be? How much are you going to rely on your predecessors who've worked in that genre? And for instance, on sci-fi movies, space movies, it's a very narrow genre. There's very few people who've made films. I mean, apart from fantasy films like Star Wars or those kind of where anything can go, serious sci-fi films about space exploration, it's very narrow. There's only a handful of movies, and you have to follow in their wake. And it's weird, you know, making a space movie. I don't know whether... So you make a space movie, and Stanley Kubrick is to blame for this. So when you make a space movie, you know, if I send this bottle of water to Daniel, it has to go in slow motion, like that, because we're in space. Right? Has to. If you do it like that, it looks wrong, and the audience go, oh, that's shit. He couldn't even be bothered to do it as though it was in space. If you look at the space station, things move at the same speed. They just don't have any resistance, you know? But Kubrick, because of that bloody pen at the beginning of 2001, going like that the whole time, everybody thinks you have to do everything in slow motion in space. In fact, it's quite jerky in space. But you can't make the films like that, so you spend all this time making... And it's very, very difficult to do, and you know, non-gravity, you know, on Earth, it's very, very difficult. And so, what you find is there's very few people, unless it's a franchise, there's very few people ever go back into space. Very few directors ever go back into space once you've made one space movie, because they drive you mad making them. So, but I enjoyed it at the time. But just looking back on it, I don't know whether I'd ever do another one.
And how about horror? How did you enjoy getting into the genre of zombies?
Yeah, listen, I love horror movies. I was brought up a very strict Catholic, and I remember one of the first films I ever saw when I left home was The Exorcist. And I mean, I was meant to be, I was 18, it was like, I was meant to be a grown man. I was terrified going to bed at night having seen that movie for weeks afterwards, you know? Because if you're a Catholic, it's like seriously gets to you, that film. So yeah, I love the genre, and I would certainly make another one of those again, yeah.
We hope so, it will be very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Over here. Hi.
Go ahead.
I'm nervous. Is it difficult for you as a filmmaker to see a movie and start thinking if you could do better some things or make something different to be a better movie? Sorry.
No, I know what you mean. I'm very lucky actually. I tend to lose myself in the film. I know people think if you're a film director, you can't watch a film anymore without thinking, oh, they should have done this or that would have been. I'm not like that actually. I get lost in a film very, very quickly. and I lose myself, and I cry quite a lot in films, and laugh and stuff like that. So I'm never, so I'm lucky like that. I know some people aren't like that, but I find it very easy to get lost in a film. And I've always been like that, and even now, even stupid films, you know. So I'm not completely anti-stupid. I like stupid films as well sometimes, you know, that you can have a good laugh at or a good cry at, you know. I like that. I enjoy that. So no, I'm very open to. I like watching films generally. Still do, you know. I don't tire of that at all, unless they're really, really, really bad and annoying, you know. Not mentioning any names. Definitely not mentioning any names. But so yeah.
What's your favorite movie?
Oh, Apocalypse Now.
Thank you.
Listen, to those of you, and actually talk to the people upstairs, there's a whole bunch of people upstairs as well, hello upstairs. So anybody who doesn't think Apocalypse Now isn't the best movie ever made, please see me afterwards. I do think it's genius because it's not perfect, and yet it's the most extraordinary action movie. You know, and by action, I mean the birth of cinema. The origins of cinema were action, weren't they? That's why we developed it from photography, because we could gather. I mean, our ancestors gathered in these little cinemas in market towns and watched figures moving, and we just gasped, you know, seeing a train coming at them. People freaked out and fainted, and I love the fact that that's the origin of cinema. And Apocalypse Now is the greatest action movie because it's all movement, the whole movie. And every time it stops the movement, there's a catastrophe, and then it moves again. And I love that movie. It's not great for the depiction of women, I know that. They're just Playboy bunnies, as I remember, that's it really. But other than that, it's a great movie, I think, personally. That's my favourite.
Hello, Danny. Second row. Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. I was very curious about this. You have very successfully done films that maybe nobody else would back. So I wonder if you would ever consider doing an adaptation of The Wasp Factory, and what would it take to convince the studio to back it?
What, to do The Wasp Factory, Ian Banks' novel?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, Ian Banks is a Scottish serious writer and sci-fi writer. He wrote under pseudonyms as well, who died actually just a couple of months ago, very sadly, while he was completing his final book. I used to love The Wasp Factory actually. I never really thought about it as a film. I know there was talk about making it as a film at one point, but I can't remember who was involved in that. No, so I can't answer your question really. I read it a long time ago, but I never thought that's a film, I should make that as a film. You know, it's still possible to enjoy books without...
I think you should do it.
Oh, right, okay. I'll tell you what I did read recently. I don't know whether you've ever read it. A book called Darkness at Noon by Arthur Koestler. Anybody ever read that? That's the most extraordinary book about... it's actually about... what is it about? It's actually about something he calls the oceanic feeling. The last 50 pages about the oceanic feeling. It's just incredible. It's actually about, it's basically a criticism of Stalin, really. And it's how, because the guy who narrates it was one of the originators of the revolution, and he is tortured, you know, he's one of the group who were tortured into admitting that he has betrayed the revolution and therefore should be killed, as an inspiration to the rest of the people. But what a book. Oh my God, that's an amazing book if you ever get a chance. If you're interested in that world, it's a fantastic read for the oceanic feeling.
Well, thanks.
Hola, acá, ¿la haré en español? Aquí. Hola. Bueno, primero, gracias por esta última película que realizó, Trans. Gracias por tener a Casella ahí, por Dios, gracias, doblemente. Y nos has hablado mucho de cómo sacar nuestros proyectos, la energía que debemos de seguir teniendo, pero a mí me gustaría saber cuál es la energía interna, aparte de la pasión, algo interno. Has dicho que eres católico, tu espíritu, ¿qué es lo que te mueve para hacer cine? Otra pregunta, ¿qué opinas del cine documental? y si tú harías un film documental.
Yeah, thank you for that and for the translation. Whoever did it. I love documentaries. I think they're a different skill, and they're an extraordinary skill where you build a story. Supposedly, I've never made one, so I don't know. Supposedly, you have to have the bravery of not trying to impose anything on your material until you've gathered it all, you know, and then you form a documentary. I know some people who work like that, and I'm a huge fan of them. I don't think I could make one. I haven't found a subject that I'd want to make one of anyway. And I wouldn't assume I could, actually. But I'm not a Catholic anymore. I was brought up a very strict Catholic, as I've mentioned a lot of times, obviously, so it's clearly important. But I'm no longer a Catholic. Where my energy comes from, I'm very fortunate that I've always had this kind of drive to work. You know, even when I did labouring jobs, when I started working, you know, I would do them with enormous enthusiasm. I loved working. You know, even if it was just, in fact, I had a job digging graves, actually. One of my first jobs was, they used to dig graves manually, and I used to do that. I used to love doing that. It was, seems an odd thing, but I've always enjoyed jobs. And I think people do, actually. I don't believe, you know, when you get right-wing people saying people are lazy and they won't work, and I think people love work, actually. They find a community in work and they long for it in a way. They bitch about it, like we all do, but actually they long for it as well, I think. That's my belief. And I believe in people, really, I think. That drives me on. I believe in we all... And this was actually the philosophy behind Slumdog Millionaire. Nobody referred to this because they referred to the romance and the dancing and all that kind of stuff. Actually, what the film's about is that every person's story is important. That's actually what the film's actually about. You know, if you want to look at the film on a grand philosophical level, that was actually our intention, is that boy's story was so important as the way it worked out, that it helped him not only win the game show, defeat the evil host, but also win the impossible girl of his dreams. So that everybody's story is important, no matter whose it is, you know. That there's enough there in everybody's story that has value. And I believe that, so, personally.
Thanks.
Hello. Here. Front. Hi, thank you very much for being here. I think that your movies are deep movies, full of soul, as you have been saying all this time, full of passion. But at the same time, there are very successful commercial films, pop films, cult films. How could you describe your personal style or the clue, the key for doing both things successfully?
I think it's that you constantly want to surprise people. I think you know, it's an inevitable instinct. There's only so many stories you can tell, and because I make kind of fiction stories, like not documentaries, and there are obviously limited stories that you can tell. So I want to always try and tell them in a way that's surprising. You know, because otherwise they won't be surprising. They really won't be surprising. You know, you have a responsibility as a storyteller, which is what a filmmaker is, to try and tell the story in a surprising way. And that's not necessarily big style. It can be just the rhythm of the film, like the film last night. Hallie, the rhythm of that film was very important to the way he was telling the story. He let the scenes play. You know, he didn't overcut, you know, to hide things or to. He let the film play and let you read the film as you watched it. So it's that approach really that tries to tell a story in a surprising way. Because it would have been that film last night. It would have been very possible to tell the film in an outrageous way because the violence is so extreme. But he didn't do that. He told it in a very measured way, of which the violence was part of it and was like startlingly true. You know, even though, you know, it could have just been cinema violence, but it was much more important than that because of the way he showed it, I think. So it just depends, so you're trying to always to confound people's expectations and surprise them, to see things afresh, I think. That's the idea.
Thank you very much.
Here in front. Hi, Mr. Boyle. Some critics say that perdón, voy a hablar en español. Sí, algunos críticos han dicho que Trainspotting es la naranja mecánica de los 90. A propósito de Kubrick, ¿qué piensa usted? ¿Es lo que usted pretendía o lo imaginaba siquiera?
So that came through live as clock mechanic. No, sorry. No, it's good.
It was certainly consider that Trainspotting was the Clockwork Orange of our times. Is that your intention?
I don't know what its release pattern was like in Mexico, but the film Clockwork Orange was released in Britain for 3 weeks only, because then there was a series of murders which were claimed to be copycat versions of what was in the film. So Kubrick withdrew the film for 25 years, I think. If you lived in Britain, the only place you could see Clockwork Orange, because it wasn't available on DVD or video, you had to go to Paris to see it. And because of that, it played in a cinema in Paris for 25 years. It literally played because so many people wanted to see it, and that was the only way you could get to see it. I was very lucky. Me and a friend called Declan, who was 14, I was 16, and I looked older, so I bought the tickets because it was an 18 certificate. We got in to see it in that 3 weeks, and it did leave a very strong impression on me. And I remember buying the soundtrack immediately afterwards, which is the first soundtrack I'd ever bought of a film, you know, on vinyl. And it made a very, very deep impression on me, certainly. So, and there are episodes in the film which are based on bits of Clockwork Orange anyway, as a kind of gesture, a homage, if you like, to Stanley Kubrick and the physical design of that film. So it was a big influence, yes, for sure, absolutely. The other influence, actually, funnily enough, which was very important, was the Scorsese film Goodfellas. Because what was interesting about Goodfellas, and we copied this, is that if you've got a voiceover, and you know at the beginning of Trainspotting there's all that talking, you know, choose like and all that kind of stuff. We noticed in Goodfellas he had a huge amount of voiceover. The tendency in film is when you've got voiceover is it makes you lazy, and it lets the voice do the work instead of the pictures. But what Goodfellas did is that he shot 3 times as much material as you would normally need, because then he pulsated it through the voiceover, and we copied that for Trainspotting. Trainspotting is deliberately, there's a lot of voiceover, it's deliberately full of material to accompany the voiceover, some of which is appropriate, some of it is contradictory, deliberately. So that was a big influence on it as well.
Hey there.
In the top.
In the top. Do you have a microphone? Should you yell it? Hey. Give her a chance up here. 1 second.
Got it. So, just to tell you what the lady said, she recommended that you all buy copies of the DVDs of all the films I've made. That was right. So she said, make sure you all have your own personal copy. No, she asked. I think she was saying how much am I personally in the films as a person, and it's really interesting actually because they're full of it actually, even though you don't intend it to be. You know, there is one that is a kind of, I mean, I sound a bit stupid saying it, it's a sort of autobiographical one, which is Millions, which is this one about this little kid growing up and he sees saints and his mum's died, and you know, and that's very, very autobiographical, even though it's written by another guy, a writer called Frank Cottrell Boyce. But actually, when you look at them, you find yourself everywhere in the films, and it's weird. You're often not conscious of it, and I think that's probably healthy, you know. But you do find yourself there, but kind of in the movies, you know, romanticising yourself, because I think that's what you inevitably do, because you know, you always imagine yourself as the. I mean, listen, I'd never made a film until we made our latest film, Trance. We'd never made a film with a woman at the centre of the film, never, and there is a reason for that. It's because I'm a bloke, and you realise you've made 9 films and every single one is about a guy. And every single one of those films is about the same thing, which is that there's a guy who faces insurmountable odds and overcomes them. They're all the films are the same, basically. And, which is really weird to think. And we deliberately contradicted that with Trance, where we tried to put this female character at the heart of it. And that will be available to buy on DVD very soon. Thank you.
Y esta va a ser la última. Hola. Estoy hablando con Dani. Bueno, la pregunta es muy directa. Ya nos hablaste de zombies, ya nos hablaste de hipnosis, de la degradación humana. ¿Qué temas le interesan ahorita a Danny Boyle? ¿Cuál fue la otra cosa? Degradación humana, la última. ¿Degradación humana? Sí, refiriéndonos a Trainspotting.
That's it. Seriously, the birth of surgery is There's this book we've been working on called Ingenious Pain, which is about the early days of surgery in England, in the kind of Enlightenment, mid-18th century, when they began the movement towards properly going inside the body. They hadn't discovered anaesthetic or antiseptic yet, but that was coming, and we've been researching it, and that has been riveting, because we were just saying today about how, you know, you get to an age, and you know, 100 years ago, a person like you wouldn't have got to that age. We owe ourselves, you know, to medicine, you know, the improvements in our life scales and our lifespans. And the birth of surgery is something I'm obsessed with at the moment. So we might make a film about that next year. It's kind of pretty unwatchable, because it's a bit like that scene in 127 Hours when he cuts his arm off. You know, it's like, they're tough to watch, these films, but they need to be made. So we might make that next, that film. So we'll see.
I think that's it.
I went to an autopsy actually as part of the research, which if you ever get a chance to attend an autopsy, it's just extraordinary to see it. It's so sad and yet so beautiful, the way they just peel your identity away and then put it back on afterwards. Because what they do is they have to take samples out of, you know, they take samples of the liver, of the brain, you know, to find out why you died. And we have a law in Britain now that everything has to go back into the body when you bury it. So you can't take out the liver and keep it for any research purposes. It has to go back in the body. But when to take a sample of the brain, they saw off the top and it comes open like a tin cup, like that. They take the brain out to slice it, and it expands the brain as soon as they take it out, so they can't get it back in there. So they put it back in the tummy. So you're buried, if you have an autopsy, you're buried with your brains in your belly. So that was extraordinary, I thought. Stuff like that, I think it's an extraordinary experience to see. Anyway, you know, and we're all nothing really, which the Museum of the Mummies also teaches you. We'll all end up the same anyway, so enjoy it while you're here, yeah?
Muchas gracias, señor Boyle.